Kyle Schwarber's free agency continues to be the biggest story of this Phillies offseason, and another team has emerged in the mix for wanting to bring Schwarber home. That's right, I said home, as the Cincinnati Reds are showing interest for the hometown kid here. Do want to dive into how legitimate this is, why I don't put a ton of stock into this, and why I think the dollars are going to be what makes sense for Kyle Schwarber directly here. So obviously we've heard a ton of rumors, a ton of reports, and a ton of storylines regarding the status of Kyle Schwarber. He's one of the highest profile free agents in all of baseball, not just in Philadelphia, with Kyle Tucker really the only guy in that same tier of conversation. But Schwarber directly here, I've expressed my fears that this is just going to extend beyond what my comfort level is for the timeline of the offseason, but this is still a top priority for the Phillies any way you slice it. Now, to dive into what is being said here, I do want to start off with this report that is coming out. Now, this originates from Kyle Schwarber having sort of a hometown event in which he donated a ton of money that it is now called Kyle Schwarber Baseball Field at his hometown there. Shout out to the Middletown Middies. And this guy, Charlie Clifford, who ultimately is a news anchor out there in that area, tweets out, Kyle Schwarber said he and his family will spend a lot of time back home in Middletown in the future. As the NL MVP frontrunner goes into free agency, he spoke with our Porter's videos about the potential interest for his hometown Reds. Now, I'm going to play that clip to get you the exact context of what Kyle Schwarber said, because I do think, as is typically the case in media nowadays, there is a bit more being made about this than I think is the actuality. Now, we know how important Kyle Schwarber is to this baseball team, to the Phillies in particular, as a fabric of the entire organization here. Could the Reds be eyeing him in the same way? So let me pull up that clip here, and do ultimately want you to hear from Schwarber yourself.
How's it feel to be back in town?
Oh, it's always great. Whenever we're here, it's always fun for us, right? That, our kids, grow up. We got our families here. Mine and my wife's family. We got all of our friends who all have kids the same age. It feels like it's always fun for us to be here. And like I said, this is a place that we call home, and we love it here. We're going to spend a lot of time here as a family in the future.
How's it feel to be a free agent?
Feels great. I mean, as bad as it could be, but we'll see what happens. I'm never looking ahead. You just gotta take it day by day, see what happens.
If the Reds showed any interest in you during this free agency offseason, what would that mean to you?
Yeah, I think good old Gordon Whitmire was the one who started this frenzy at the All-Star game. But he asked a question kind of similar to that, where I said the kid and me, right? That I grew up going to games there. I grew up sitting in the bleachers and watching a lot of games, and I think the kid would be excited, right? You have your hometown team that's calling. So but also being in the profession and knowing a little bit more of the ins and outs, right? You're never going to not be an open ear, right? You always have to listen and keep different options open and to see what happens. So we'll see.
So shout out to Bill Dennison for that video there. Not quite shout out for the camera work, as come on, give the dude a little bit of room to breathe. And I do think my larger takeaway, this interview goes on for a little bit farther here, and I will say one of the funnier parts about how it continues is sort of the hype about what would it mean to be playing in front of tens of thousands of people in Cincinnati. The dude plays at Citizens Bank Park, man. I think he's well aware what a good atmosphere looks like. I understand that there is a principle that has to be tied to your hometown team, that each of these guys grew up with obviously a loyalty to a fan base there, and Kyle Schwarber has been pretty open on him being from Cincinnati, him sitting in the bleachers. And the quote that is really making the most rounds here is this, saying, quote, "Being a baseball fan and growing up and watching Cincinnati baseball for your whole youth, that's how you fall in love with baseball." And I think it would draw your attention, right? Being able to play for your childhood team is something that I think it'd be awesome. Now, for Schwarber directly here, the reason I think this should be viewed in a little bit of different context, and I do think for what it's worth that most of that interview was pretty general PR, good, athlete, not saying anything too leading there. I think those questions were fairly leading and pretty direct, to be perfectly honest with you. But for Schwarber directly here, I think the conversation is still going to circle down to dollars and cents. And the reason that I say that in its entirety is take a look at what Kyle Schwarber has made throughout the duration of his career. This guy, throughout being one of the better players in baseball for really the better part of the past few seasons and even extending a bit beyond, he's made $99 million over the course of his MLB career. The previous contract that he got with the Phillies, of which, of course, he was making $20 million annually the past 3 seasons, $19 million before, that was his big ticket contract. And don't get me wrong, I am not here to turn my nose up at $99 million. I'm a guy who punches the clock for 25 an hour on a regular basis here, so I'm not complaining about that level of money. But for Schwarber directly, this is his opportunity to get that payday, that life-changing, you're number one of your career type outlook. That is the type of money that he's going to get, and that is not quite the type of money that I think the Reds are going to be comfortable spending. And the reason that I say that is in its entirety is we are blessed here in Philadelphia to have an owner that completely is bought in on wanting to win baseball games, to spend whatever it takes to bring that caliber of roster. And for what it's worth, just looking at last year's numbers, you can see the Phillies sitting at third in the MLB in the entirety of payroll. That's the Dodgers ahead of them, the Mets ahead of them, and nowhere else, nobody other team in baseball except the Phillies spending more than that. Them sitting at number 3 in the league. And you sift down to some of these other teams that popped up in rumors. For starters, the Reds in itself sitting at 19th in this category. The Pirates, who have merged in this conversation, right down at the bottom of where I cropped this there at 23rd. And for what it's worth, the Reds directly here, they're the largest free agent contracts that they have ever given out was to Nick Castellanos and Mike Moustakas, each for 4 years, $64 million. That is not the type of money that Kyle Schwarber is going to be commanding. Let's not forget that this is a dude who is one of the premier power bats in baseball. This is coming off a career best season in which he launched 56 home runs, 132 RBIs across his 604 at-bats, 145 hits, 108 walks, a 365 on-base percentage, a 563 slugging here, and at 32 years old, this is the one. This is your opportunity to cash in on them, and I think that conversation is going to cross his mind. Now, if push comes to shove, and it is so important to Kyle Schwarber to play in front of Cincinnati, to play for his home squad, there's nothing the Phillies can really do about that. But what I do not foresee happening under any circumstance here is that the Phillies are going to be outbid by a team like the Reds. The only thing that would truly strike fear into me from like a, standpoint of spending is if it is a team like the Mets or the Dodgers or the Yankees getting in the mix. And it doesn't really make sense in the context of any of those teams directly there for why Schwarber would be a baseball fit for what they add to their roster. I do think the Phillies are going to come in with the heaviest pockets. I do think Kyle Schwarber wants to be back in Philadelphia, and that's sort of where the story does end with me. Now, to dive into that a little bit deeper, I did want to pull up this portion of the Reds report here, which is, of course, coming from Sean Casey of MLB Network, who says, quote, "I'd be shocked if Cincinnati doesn't make a run at him. He's from right outside of Cincinnati. His family is from there. I think he has a house there. The Reds need a power bat like Schwarber. That place would come to see a guy like this." I also sort of think from a team like the Reds, and I think the Pirates fall into this category too, there is value in just being in the mix, being a team mentioned in those rumors, showing interest in the top free agents, even if it does not ultimately come to a conclusion there. When you are in those same type of rumors, that does mean something to players around the league. That is an organization that is showing the signs that you should hope for as far as willingness to spend, wanting to build a baseball team the proper way. But I do not think the Reds, in their larger trajectory, have been a team that have shown that willingness at a consistent enough basis for that to honestly matter there. Do I think there will be a conversation? For sure. Do I think this is largely blown out of proportion and a bit more of the organization, grandstanding a bit to make sure that they are showing an honest effort to bring in their guy, the hometown hero, the kid that could return to Cincinnati? That is more of what I think the story is. So I give a bit of credit to the Reds for trying to be in the mix here, but ultimately this is not something that I view as a legitimate threat to the Phillies. There's going to be a lot of reports and a lot of rumors in the coming weeks. I do hope that this is resolved somewhat in the short term, that I would prefer it being within the next couple weeks so the Phillies can plan out what their funds are for the rest of the offseason and how this entire roster finishes together. That this is not just a Kyle Schwarber conversation. This is an entire roster conversation. They got to figure out the outfield. They got to make a JT Realmuto decision. They got to see what Ranger Suarez is about to get on the open market. There's a lot of bodies and a lot of mouths to feed within this Phillies team. So for Kyle Schwarber directly, this is about him sorting through what is important to him, but I don't see a world in which he's going to pass down the level of money that I believe the Phillies will offer in favor of heading back home. And for what it's worth, him at 32 years old, you can absolutely have that ride off into the sunset moment. That yes, it will be past your prime, and most likely, depending on the years that are ultimately decided on here. But if he does play the next 3-4 seasons in Philadelphia and sign sort of a farewell tour deal in Cincinnati, I think you sort of accomplish all your goals on the same front here. So I credit the Reds for trying to get in the mix, but this is not something that I put a ton of stock into. And again, until we hear one of these big spending teams like the Dodgers, like the Mets, like the Yankees, teams like that willing to back up the brink trucks and offer that level of money, the Phillies should not be blinking about the outlook in the short term. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you believe this is legitimate sentiment? Is this more a little bit of Kyle Schwarber trying to create leverage? I do not think those quotes were anything that raised enough of an eyebrow to me. I think Schwarber doing the right thing, essentially, by giving the organization, giving the fan base and his hometown the proper respect while not shutting the door and still continuing on the pathway to handling his negotiations the proper way. So we'll see how things break down from here, but would love to hear your guys' thoughts from that. Are you concerned about Kyle Schwarber being lured back to Cincinnati, where he started or grew up for the better part of his lifetime there? Drop those thoughts in the comments below. Appreciate you guys for tuning in this video. If you have not already, make sure to smash the subscribe button right here on Phillies Digest. We're going to be breaking things down from every single angle across this offseason and cannot wait to dive into when pen does hit paper for Kyle Schwarber and the rest of this team. So appreciate you guys once again. I'll be back talking to you next time. Peace.